Welcome, Commissioner Georgieva. Thank you for meeting with us today. The results of the recent Eurobarometer were very good. I wonder why you think European citizens showed such strong support for humanitarian aid and what impact that's going to have on your work.
Well, the results are not only very good, they are surprising in the context of hardship at home, because since 2010, the European citizens have increased from 79 to 88% their support for humanitarian action. And I see two reasons for that. First, the crisis actually brings the best out of people. There is more empathy for those who suffer much more than we Europeans in these difficult conditions at home. And second, these have been very difficult years. People have seen dramatic events, starting with the Haiti earthquake, then the floods in Pakistan, then the famine in the Horn of Africa, famine in the 21st century, now the devastation in the Sahel, the Libya crisis, the crisis in Syria. And all of this tells us one thing, that we may be, as a world, over the years becoming richer, but it is also a more fragile world. And we Europeans, even in the deepest of crises, are so much more fortunate than millions of people in other places.
And do you think there's a need then to increase EU funding, given the rising number of emergencies? And are you satisfied with the role that EU member states are playing in this?
In the area of humanitarian aid, we are increasing funding. Let me just give you one illustration. Last year, 2011, we started in the Commission with 850 million euros for humanitarian aid. But it was a very difficult year. We had to go to emergency reserve. We ended up spending 1.1 billion, and we reached the affected populations, 150 million people with this money. Our member states, despite of the crisis, responded extremely generously to the Horn of Africa famine. We collectively have provided 700 million euros. That, I think, is going to continue to be the case. When there is a big crisis, it generates a tremendous outburst of support from Europe. And yes, I do believe that we need to provide more resources, because they are more frequent, more devastating natural disasters. And conflicts are tearing apart every year some 20 to 30 countries. But we also face crisis at home. And what it means for us is we have to be very dedicated to use the sacrifice of our citizens well. That is accountability for the results of our work. Make sure that what we do is transparent. I'm actually more worried about funding long-term development projects. I think this is where civil society has to be very vocal to make sure that our member states, even if they cut funding now, they're quick to restore it. Well, better not to cut at all, but if they are forced to cut because of very dramatic domestic circumstances, as it happened in Spain, make sure that we go up as growth comes back to Europe, and that we respond with priority to the needs of the most vulnerable populations.
At the moment, you referred to the emergency in the Sahel. There's food insecurity there that's affecting millions of people. I know a plan is responding with relief items, with child protection, with education. What are the priorities for the European Commission?
Well, we have two sets of priorities. One is on the immediate emergency. We identified the risk early. We acted very early. Already in mid-January, I was in the region. We made the decision to double humanitarian assistance, targeting the most vulnerable: children, pregnant women, elderly. So we have increased funding for nutrition programs, for therapeutic feeding for kids, but also blanket distribution for most vulnerable populations very early. And we will continue to push for support for the most vulnerable, and also engaging the countries themselves. So measures we take internationally and domestically, they are combined for a high impact. This is for the immediate emergency, and things are still very serious. I mean, 17 million people at risk in the countries of the Sahel. Big number among them are children. But then we have the longer term, and here is the sad reality. In 7 years, there have been 3 devastating droughts hitting the Sahel region: 2005, 2010, and already in 2012. That shrinking of the drought cycle has enormously negative impact. Why? Because people cannot recover. There is not enough time between 2 droughts for communities to rebuild their resilience. So we absolutely must engage with the region to build this resilience to shocks. Being mindful that in the Sahel, it is not just the drought that hits communities and countries. Insecurity, as it is happening now in Mali, can drag a country back from progress it has achieved very fast. So that engagement for long-term resilience, where we take 10, 15 years time horizon, and we bring development support and humanitarian aid together, so we can be a force for good for the region. This is what we are aiming for.
And in terms of this long-term resilience, you've said it's important to link relief with development. What steps are you taking to work more closely with your colleague, Development Commissioner André Spielberg? And also, what do you see as the gaps that are there, the challenges you have to bridge that gap?
We have made 2 priorities for our cooperation. 1, linking relief to rehabilitation and development. 2, invest in resilience in parts of the world that are most vulnerable to recurrent shocks. Sahel is one of them, but also the Horn of Africa, and we can go over the map of the world, and we know that there are many other regions, take Haiti or Pakistan. So we have looked at cooperation in very pragmatic way. So far, what we have achieved is the following. For the Horn of Africa and for the Sahel, we have put together programs for resilience where we combine our muscle so we can have a real impact. Specifically, what does it mean? It means that our humanitarian interventions take a look into how they can contribute to immediate life-saving operations, but also help communities to be stronger for shocks in the future. For example, we have revised our food assistance policy in Europe. No more we dump on communities our agricultural surpluses. We don't provide food, we provide cash and vouchers. By doing so, and of course, as long as the local markets work, by doing so we feed the hungry, but we also help the local farmers. And this is an example of how humanitarian aid can be an instrument for longer term resilience. And on the other side, on the development side, we make sure that the support programs for development target the highest vulnerabilities. In the Sahel, it is lack of irrigation. Small-scale irrigation can dramatically change the outlook for a community. Or making sure that governments build stocks food stocks to withstand even the worst of droughts. This is what our development colleagues can do. Or social safety nets. So when the drought occurs, we don't start from zero to provide protection for the most vulnerable populations. We know who they are, we know how to help them. And that we do for the Horn of Africa, that we do for the Sahel. Another example of this cooperation is Côte d'Ivoire, devastated by 10 years of conflict. We came together, humanitarian and development funding, so we can drive, together with the government, we can drive the country towards more stability. What is the advantage? Humanitarians have higher tolerance for risk. They can operate in less secure environment. The development colleagues, they have better understanding of how to build systems, health systems, education systems. Together, building our strength together, we can do much more.
Speaking of vulnerable groups, children are one of the most vulnerable groups in a disaster situation, in particular girls. What is ECHO doing to ensure children's rights and also to mainstreaming of gender in your work?
Well, we do two things. One is we are always driven by a good assessment of needs. In other words, who are the most vulnerable? Where are they? And for this, we rely a lot on our partners like PLAN or UNICEF to be able to direct assistance to children, women, handicapped, the elderly. Two, we have designed specific interventions that target the kids that are victims of disasters or conflicts. For example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, we have a program to deal with sexual violence and specifically for underage girls. Make sure that there is attention paid, that there is protection for them, but also that if the worst is to happen, there is, in other words, girls fall victims of sexual violence, there is a support system to bring them back on their feet. I have met with young girls that have been victimized in DRC, and they have found a pathway to a better future. One of them actually has chosen to work on that, to work on helping other girls. And actually listening to her, this is the kind of reservoir of strength that is necessary to build more resilience among kids. We also have in 2008 we have developed it's like a policy paper that looks specifically at children as victims of natural disasters and conflicts. And there we of course pay attention to boys and girls, and they have separate needs. On the gender elements, I mean, there are small things that can be done that we have learned from experience, like make sure that in a camp, the bathroom area, there is light and security. Or when there is a natural disaster, that we target women-led households explicitly. I remember going to Pakistan after the floods, visiting an area, and I look around and there are only men. I saw only 2 young girls, probably too young to be hidden in the tents. Well, unless we proactively reach out and we do it in a way that is sensitive to local people, half of the affected population would not get help. And that for ECHO, I say this with pride. Lessons have been learned through many years of humanitarian assistance, and they are the platform for us to do better, to help most vulnerable population better.
ECHO partners with NGOs, like PLAN, for the implementation of a lot of the work that you're doing. What do you see as the added value of working with NGOs?
area of the world that suffers from disasters and conflicts is vast. If we are to be parachuting assistance top-down, many more people would die, many more millions will suffer. The NGOs, the grassroots organizations are those that are there. They work with communities, and when something happens, when the needs are there, the best way to help people is to use this outreach, and that is what our partners are for us. They are the delivery mechanism in terrible circumstances. And no crisis is the same as another one. And these relations that are built locally, they're the way to help people. In southern Somalia, I visited a village very close to Shabab-controlled area, where our NGO partner has been there for the last 6 years. They have built trust with the community. So when the famine hit, they were the natural envoy of assistance. But if they were not to be there for the 6 years, no way there would have been acceptance of this help. So incredibly important to nurture relations, and this is what the NGOs are best in doing. And then this trust is your protection. But this trust is also the difference between help or no help, life or death for people.
Maybe a final question. You've been a very outspoken champion for humanitarian affairs in your whole time as commissioner. What do you want your legacy to be when you're finished in this post?
I have one single-minded objective, and it is to make humanitarian action more effective as early as possible, prevent unnecessary suffering. And for this I actually have a simple illustration. This is something that everybody who works on food security knows. On malnutrition, people know it. You put it around the arm of a kid between 9 months and 59 months, and then it tells you whether this child is at the risk of malnutrition. When it is in the green, everything is good. It gets into the yellow or the orange, high risk of malnutrition. When it is in the red, this child may not survive, and even if the kid survives, it probably would never be a fully productive member of society. Today, we find it easier to raise money for humanitarian action when we are here, when we are in the red. Because Europeans, Americans, Canadians, Japanese, people just don't want to see kids dying. But we have to move to action early. First, we act early, we prevent suffering. We don't reduce it, we prevent suffering. Second, it costs our taxpayers less. When we act here, in the green, in the early yellow, it costs 10 euros. When we sleep there in the red, it costs 150 euros. No results guaranteed. So my obsession is with preparedness, prevention, disaster risk reduction, dealing with the risks of conflicts early. Make sure that we anticipate crisis, we act early, we target the most vulnerable.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Georgieva.